Hello and welcome to today's panel, Ask the Experts Migrating SAP to AWS. My name's James Linnane, I'll be your host for today, and I'm joined by a panel of industry experts. So we'll start with a round of introductions. And Jonathan, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good morning. So I'm Jonathan Lake. I'm from AWS and I'm responsible for the SAP business in the UK. Worked on SAP for about the last 25 years.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. Sean, Gary?
Yeah, good morning. My name's Sean Liberty. I work for Mandant Solutions. I've been around SAP and ERP for the last 20 odd years, working at both Oracle and SAP, and latterly for the last few years with managed services, SAP managed services.
Good morning, my name's Gary Quee. I also work for Mandant Solutions. I've been working with SAP now since 1993, so quite a number of years. Thank you.
And Mike?
Hi, I'm Principal Data Engineer at Claranet, and I've been working with big data and database systems for the last number of years, and I'm an AWS Professional Solutions Architect.
Excellent, thanks Mike. If you're unfamiliar with Claranet, we're an AWS Premier Partner. We're experts in migrating mission critical workloads and applications to the cloud. So today we're going to start the talk in the knowledge that cloud is no longer an expectation, an aspiration. It's actually an expectation. There's a lot more pressure in the boardrooms. Certainly, what we see, a lot more pressure in the boardrooms to make use of cloud, especially in a post-COVID world. I think we can all agree on that, gentlemen. With remote workforces or organisations pivoting to find new revenue streams post-pandemic. So with this in mind, I guess a question: who is moving their SAP to the cloud right now, and what are the benefits of moving SAP to public cloud? We'll go to Jonathan first.
Yeah, good morning. So in actual fact, there's a huge wave of customers that are moving to moving their SAP workloads onto AWS. We've got well over 5,000 customers and 13 years of experience. And so the majority of customers are moving for a number of reasons. The first one, of course, is cost savings. So typically, the majority of customers are looking to save around about 30 to 50% OPEX year-on-year savings. So obviously cost savings is one of the big drivers, but most importantly of all, customers are looking to innovate in the cloud as well. So not only achieve those cost savings, but also leverage things like data lakes, extending their business processes beyond the SAP world, using AI and machine learning, Internet of Things, etc. So there are so many use cases and business benefits for moving into the cloud, and cost savings is obviously the obvious one, but as we move forward, more and more customers are looking to innovate in various ways. And the other reason, of course, is to improve availability, improve security posture as well. So there's a big risk management element to it as well. But those are the three reasons why customers are moving. So it's about risk, it's about managing that risk, it's about cost and saving cost, typically 30 to 50%, and it's about innovating.
Excellent, thank you, Jonathan. And Gary, Sean, anything to add there?
I think to add to Jonathan's points, and based on my and our experience, it has been very much that if I go back 5 or maybe 6 years, people were, SAP customers were interested in cloud. There certainly wasn't a stampede towards cloud if you had SAP. But I think some of the concerns around that time were around security. That always was a big objection. and it was viewed as relatively new. And I think the whole term public, I think kind of scared people off slightly, or to one degree or another, because, you know, SAP is mission critical. Companies have a lot of IP within their SAP. But over in private cloud, if they were going to go cloud, it tended to be private. If you had SAP, your SAP went on to private cloud. But certainly over the last 2-3 years, it is becoming a stampede towards, from what we see, public cloud. And there are many sort of aspects as to how you get there, why you would get there, the points Jonathan was making, but really more and more now, sort of equally with the cost benefits of going to public cloud. It's very much the business benefits that can be brought to bear, and, you know, broadly speaking, Jonathan touched on it and might want to expand on it. Really, is the whole, you know, access to data within a public cloud, and all the innovation that AWS as a hyperscaler can bring to that. You know, there are some real, you know, huge benefits for organizations, especially in this digital age.
And just to make the point, what we're actually seeing is that the whole sort of cross section of SAP customers and SAP users that are considering it now is not just the realms of the SME or mid-sized company. Now it's now very large landscapes with, you know, years and years of very large investment in SAP that are looking at the same type of migration, the same goals in terms of cost savings and everything else that comes along with it.
Excellent. So obviously we think moving existing SAP apps to public cloud can probably save in the region of 30 to 50%, freeing up funding for reinvestment into other business growth initiatives. I know we spoke a bit about security there and a few other areas. So when we look at the actual migration, how can we make the cloud migration a success? What are the typical pieces that we think of there?
I think, so again, from our perspective, my perspective, and some real old adages that, you know, still bear true regardless of where. And if you're going to be embarking on a migration of, you know, that size and criticality as SAP, it does provide a real opportunity to do some often neglected housekeeping, really. Certainly in terms of, you know, most SAP customers have had SAP for a number of years. They do truly know what they're doing with it. But having said that, most people do sort of look, you know, are forward looking, and, you know, behind them there is a bit of a, it's not so much a technical debt, but I would say a debt of housekeeping. And it could be things like, you know, code remediation, Z programs, data archiving is often forgotten. And if you are embarking on a migration, then it does provide an opportunity to maybe address some of those things with everyone knows that need doing, but don't always get to. Well, one other thing that I think Gary could expand on better than I is, don't forget interfaces. You know, SAP is usually so key to an organization, how they run their business processes, their supply chain, for example. And, you know, the number of interfaces that are built around SAP and within that supply chain is something that's often underestimated. And you can see many, or have seen many a good, you know, in a technical sense, brilliant migration in terms of time and, you know, achieving the migration within the downtime window that a customer has required, but, you know, slightly spoiled to one degree or another by, you know, forgetting a very small interface somewhere that stops printers running in a warehouse in, I don't know, Scarborough, and, you know, which can have huge business impacts. So that those real kind of basics are very key to a successful migration.
Yeah, we touched on it in the first question, really. Jonathan mentioned I think the business process extension. So what we're seeing, what is the norm now, is that, you know, companies will typically have best of breed applications. They may, you know, it might only be 2 or 3, could be more, But the reality is that SAP processes that are reliant on SAP business processes can now be extended across a number of different applications. We see it with Salesforce, Workday, with Coupa. So what's key really is, as part of that whole strategy to move SAP into the public cloud, is to really look at the whole landscape and look at where all the different touch points are. And that's certainly something that we've had a lot of experience with, and where there are a number of tools and platforms, certainly from an integration perspective, that are out there that should be considered as part of the whole strategy. Certainly if there's a lot of integration or interfacing going on, and not really to really need to understand that full workload and understand that full picture, and ensure that goes hand in hand with the core SAP migration.
And Mike, be interested to get your perspective here. We obviously know the move to cloud is a great opportunity to refactor and reduce technical debt, clean up your infrastructure and optimize costs. But I know you're there in the day-to-day doing these type of migrations. So interested to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so particularly the data archiving is an interesting one, because you've got access to a huge ability to store lots and lots of data in S3, far cheaper than you can keeping it around in a live database. And of course, you don't have to forget about it. You can start making use of that in things like machine learning. So there are lots of new things that you can take advantage of at the same time as doing all of this housekeeping.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm sure there'll be a number of customers on the call today thinking, can they take this journey by themselves? Is this something that we see customers taking the journey by themselves, Jonathan?
Yeah, so it's a good point. I guess just getting first of all to the first thing that I would do is absolutely just capture exactly what you're looking to achieve. Yeah, so what are your business drivers for migrating to the cloud? So I would start absolutely there. So is it a cost reduction exercise? Are you looking to extend business processes beyond the SAP world with things like data analytics and so on? Is your infrastructure looking, getting to a point where it's very old and therefore needs a refresh? Are you looking to a digital transformation to S4? So absolutely work, I would absolutely work with a partner who's experienced in these things, can really help with making sure you've got a clear business case, and that you've captured that business case. You're clear about what the business drivers are, what the outcome is going to be, and then I would absolutely then work with a partner to do that sort of proof of concept, where if there are any uncertainties in certain areas, or you're concerned about some of the risk in certain areas, then I would work with Claranet to build that sort of not only the business case, but to trial POCs, to make sure and validate and prove that everything is working as it should be, and then work with the partner, because partners have been through this journey multiple times. And whilst individual organizations may have the skills within their own organization to do some of these things, there's no substitute for experience and knowledge, because there are some significant benefits for working in the cloud, but there's nothing to beat that experience. Obviously the migration itself doesn't actually drive the benefit. It's the actual after the migration as well. Once you've applied that level of automation in the cloud, you're then seeing the cost savings, and then you can start to look at all of the innovations. And I think it's important to work with a partner to make sure that you're getting the most out of your cloud engagement. And there are so many areas of business benefit that can be realized from the cloud, and I think you'll get an awful lot more from working with a partner. That's my point of view. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you, Jonathan, and Sean, Gary. I guess from your point of view, the importance of finding that expert partner who can migrate and also integrate your existing core business apps.
Absolutely, yeah. Then picking up on what Gary said earlier, actually, I can recall the first time it used to be the case, certainly from my perspective, if someone had bought SAP, they tended to try and use SAP A to Z. And I always remember the first time I came across a customer that had SAP, and I just assumed they used it completely A to Z, and all of a sudden popping up were Workday and Salesforce.com, and I think, oh, that's unusual. That seems, how quaint, really. I was, to my shame, I was going, why would you do that? It just showed that I'd probably spent too long in that whole SAP world in that sense. But increasingly began to see that was not an uncommon scenario, and to a degree a trend, best of breed, and how they all talk and support key business processes, absolutely essential.
Yeah. Also, what we find is, as with SAP, there are many different ways to effectively reach the same solution or same conclusion. And I think, it's, let's not necessarily say it's people making wrong decisions, but you don't want to find that in terms of migration or in terms of the shift of a landscape, that you end up finding yourself in a situation where you've got to reverse something later on. So I think that's where it's very important to work with a partner with the experience, because they're going to guide that customer through the right path and help them based on their requirements, based on their business, based on the existing landscape. They're going to help them make the right decisions and avoid those U-turns further on down the line that could be ultimately end up to be quite costly.
Absolutely. So I think now, hearing your comments, gents, now we know the importance of an expert partner who can help outline that structured migration path, but also seamless service operation once you're actually in the cloud. So what are the common pitfalls you've seen customers or even partners make during their migrations or implementations?
Yeah, a friend of mine said that public cloud is a really fantastic way to spend money. And what he means by that is that if you're not careful, you can set yourself up into a bit of a trap by using really expensive resources and just accumulating huge bills really quickly. And that can come from just using instances that are far too large, simply because you've gone, well, that's what I used to have, that's what I must need in the cloud. And it's not just kind of throwing everything there and going, okay, I'm done. There's the whole journey of getting there is working out how best to use the cloud. It's an opportunity to improve your resiliency, improve your security position, and at the same time making sure that you're not making silly mistakes that are going to cost you lots and lots of money.
Yeah, I was going to make a very similar point, Mike. We find that companies are quite fixated on, well, this is what we have now, this is what we need in the cloud, as it were, and that's not necessarily going to sort of be the ideal solution. So it's really the, again, just to expand on that sort of saying the previous point, it's really about that migration process, looking at really where you want to be in that final position when the landscape is fully within the public cloud.
Jonathan, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely 100% agree with everything that's been said. I think that it's really important to state that obviously, providing you follow all the best practice guidelines, and there are a lot of sort of documentation and so on that's available to make sure those guidelines are followed. There's so many ways of optimizing, when you migrate to AWS. The majority of customers look to, first of all, migrate and go on a sort of on demand to start with, and look to very quickly optimize once they've got those workloads in. You typically start with that development, test, production phase as well. So there's a gradual sort of ramp up of resources. As those resources come into AWS, you can put it onto a on demand and then look to optimize with various ways of putting reserve and so on in place. So there's obviously making sure that you've got that workload absolutely working according to what you consume, and it's optimized in that way. I think that's important. I think it's also important to note, especially with SAP, because it is a monolithic application. I think it's really important to follow sort of best practice guidelines around that SAP migration, and typically those risks are quite are quite common through any SAP migration. So things like interfaces, and Sean's mentioned printing and so on. A lot of the same challenges come up in an SAP migration, so make sure those sort of principles are followed as well. And also, once you've got the workload in there, then absolutely, then there's an opportunity to optimize it in terms of the the actual workload on AWS, but also to then look to apply a lot of sort of automation to that process as well. So there's a lot of savings that can be applied through things like DevOps and automating a lot of the processes and procedures on AWS as well. And there's some huge savings there as well through automating things like copies, clones, refresh of an SAP system, etc. So start with an on-demand, optimize and optimize continuously, looking at that workload. Make sure that it's that you're only paying for what you use initially. Then put the sort of reserve on there once you've understood exactly what the workloads are, and follow all the SAP best practice guidelines around making sure you've got an upfront risk log that's well captured, well documented, and that obviously you're following the best practice principles around governance and so on for the SAP migration. So those would be my top tips, certainly.
Excellent, thank you, Jonathan. And obviously, once everything's optimized through the automation and the tooling, we can then begin to get more value out of the SAP data and the applications. So I guess we'll come to you, Mike. I know this is a question you'll be waiting for around data. So how can we evolve the use of data once we're in the cloud and everything's optimized and automated?
Yeah, so there's a lot of data services available in AWS that really help you make the most out of all this data that you've now moved there. And the obviously buzz topic right now is AI and machine learning. And actually, Amazon have done a lot to make that really, really easy for you to adopt and experiment. So there's sort of 3 tiers, if you will, of machine learning services. There's the first tier, which I like to call the kind of ready-made meal tier, where you don't have to do anything with your data. You just start making use of these services, and these are things like extracting text from documents, categorizing images, these sorts of things. So you can start doing basic analysis right away. The next sort of tier down is what I like to call the part bake tier, where you need to add some ingredients, which is your data. Now, the beauty of this is that there's a selection of different things. Fraud detection is one, personalization or recommendation system is another. You can experiment just by extracting your data, formatting it in a particular way, and giving it to these services, and start getting actionable insights, making inferences right away. This you can hook into a streaming analytics pipeline, so you can start taking data from SAP using a service like the database migration service. And as data is arriving in SAP, you can have it flowing into AWS and making these predictions. And if you find that your data has enough in it that you can derive these insights, there are good predictors in there, you can go down to the really sort of raw ingredient tier of services where you can do the deep data science. But all these services mean you can see whether this is something that's going to work for you, not kind of commit up front to 8 months of data science that might not produce a model that's going to be useful to your business.
Thank you, Mike. Jonathan, I guess from your perspective, what does AWS bring to data and that whole data journey that Mike mentions there?
Yeah, so I think this is a really hot topic, actually, and so many of our customers now are looking at sort of really using their data so that you can make intelligent decision making. You can get sort of better relationships, build better relationships with your customers. You can empower your sales teams, etc. And I think it's really important that organizations do now think about a long-term data strategy. It is absolutely needed, and we would definitely work with you, both AWS and Claranet, to pull together, help you with that long-term data strategy. As been said, it's amazing how many people are actually just using sort of manual spreadsheets, as it were. Which obviously create that risk of inaccuracy of data corruption and so on, and it's sort of that dependency on tribal knowledge that's not good. So what I would definitely say is absolutely have that data strategy. Claranet and AWS will work with you as well to help you with that strategy. It's really good as well to start small as well, create some use case scenarios for your data lake. And what I would say is start small, start with a proof of concept. So prove that, because actually ingesting data sort of out of SAP into a data lake and other multiple sources doesn't need to be that complicated, but it's really important to create that use case, have that data strategy, start small, and continually sort of evolve that, because it's amazing. When I talk to organizations, often we're working with across departments, from the operations to the supply chain use cases. Often if you're retail, it's the retail operational use cases, the marketing use cases, etc., some of the back office use cases. So work with the departments, the line of business, create those use cases, work on a long-term data strategy, and actually this is a really big hot topic area that can drive so many benefits for you, and obviously work with Claranet and AWS to help you on that journey as well.
And Mike, I know you've done a few talks recently to the AWS user group around sort of data lakes and the value of streams. Can you give us a few examples of where you've seen organizations effectively implement a really strong data strategy on AWS?
Yeah, sure. So one example that springs to mind is doing the kind of anomaly detection. So one customer that I've worked with gets metrics from devices that are monitoring in hard to reach places. So we're talking satellites, oil rigs, things like this. So this data is constantly coming in, being collected, and historically, we're just kind of looking at that kind of long historic background view of the data. Now, by being able to put that data through a streaming analytics pipeline, we're able to start seeing what's happening right now. So we've gone from looking at our business that's 24 or 48 hours old and making decisions on things that happened yesterday or last week, and now we can start making decisions on things that happened in the last 5 minutes. And if you put on top machine learning, where you're actually able to build a predictive model, you're then able to start looking at things in the future, predicting that this particular wobble in the metrics is an indication that some maintenance is going to be required. So we know that this metric always looks like this. Maybe it's got a few peaks and troughs at certain times of the week or whatever. But if it deviates from that norm, becomes anomalous, we know we need to get an engineer out there. And as you can imagine, at a business where you're talking about hard to reach equipment, being able to schedule that well in advance is very beneficial.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks. And Sean, Gary, opening the panel to yourselves around some of the things Jonathan and Mike have mentioned there.
Well, I think it just brings to the fore, really. Traditionally, moving your sort of SAP landscape either to a hosting environment, a private cloud, etc., that's very much an IT department's domain. And whilst still absolutely key from a technical sense and de-risking, mitigating, etc., and ensuring that that kind of project is successful, just to achieve, if at ground one it is that cost benefits business case. But really the holy grail is, as Mike was describing, it's the way that something like this, the business benefit that it can bring to organizations and drive, and it really does drive. And that's kind of what we're seeing as well. The business benefits from an SAP implementation landscape tends to very much be on a, if I say functional side of SAP, which is absolutely still true to this day in that sense, that there is this whole new dimension now, which certainly, from the likes of AWS and that true scale and innovation and tools, techniques, etc., it's taking it on in almost leap years, really, in terms of where we were not so long ago, really.
I think also what we've seen, certainly with SAP over recent years, is that from a customer's perspective, that they're very aware of the core business processes within within what would have been, what is ECC, or possibly within S4HANA. They understand those core business processes and how they interact. But in reality, what we've seen are a number of different approaches to the way that they handle and store data, possibly external to SAP. And I think that's probably where we're going to see a lot more movement. Okay, so clearly, that those established business processes within the ERP system will remain, but in terms of what happens around SAP on the periphery, in terms of data, large data volumes, historic or legacy data volumes, that's where we're going to see a lot more innovation, I'm sure.
Thanks all. So I think now we've obviously covered some of the reasons why people have made that initial move, that structured migration path to the cloud, optimizing and automating once we're in cloud, and then beginning to make use of the data and better use of the applications once in cloud as well. So as we kind of look at a wider picture, Jonathan, what are the kind of key differentiators for SAP on AWS against some of your other competitors?
Okay, yeah. So absolutely the reasons why people tend to go with AWS are a number of reasons, actually. First of all, I would say absolutely first and foremost is our experience. So we've been doing this for 13 years, and so we've got a unique experience there. We've got more than 5,000 customers, and that background knowledge and experience can be used to leverage, best practice guidelines. So we've got reference architectures, all of those things that can be applied. So that experience is crucial. Second thing is availability, and actually just independent research would give you that information to say actually AWS provides a more resilient, higher level of availability, higher level of disaster recovery, so better RTO and RPO. Actually, we're just only talking to Burberry actually the other day, and they said moving to AWS significantly has improved our RTO and RPO position. So availability, disaster recovery, key differentiators with the way in which AWS provide its global infrastructure and capability and experience. And those things are crucial. Of course, working with Claranet to provide that end-to-end service offering. And then, as well as the sort of core fabric and improving the quality of the services, the innovation. So AWS has more than 175 services to help you in terms of not just manage the risk, but also to get access to that innovation. We've talked about some of those innovations, but actually there's so many areas that in which we can help you. And what I would say on that area, whether it's around IoT or machine learning, or whether it's applying sort of a lot of DevOps principles, whether it's looking at data lake, etc., I would say absolutely work backwards from what your requirements are there, because AWS and Claranet have got so much experience to enable you to innovate. So innovation is also a key differentiator as well. And the other thing is that the way in which AWS works with you, so we are absolutely committed to you. It is all about putting the customer first and putting our partners first, so that AWS will work with the partner to provide that end-to-end experience and knowledge and de-risk the program. So it's about then managing the risk management, making sure that we're providing the highest levels of service and quality and availability, and then being able to innovate. And those are the reasons why AWS is different from other hyperscalers.
Excellent, thank you, Jonathan. I know we've spoken about it previously, you and I, but what would you say AWS's own SAP journey has been, if any? Is it widely adopted in AWS? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, AWS's strategy really is to, and I think this is a key point actually in terms of not so much what we do, but we will apply our experience, which is to say, make sure that you have your system of record, which lays that foundation, and you keep that a very standardized vanilla deployment as a system of record, and then innovate at the edge. So in other words, apply microservices at the edge, make sure you keep the core clean, and innovate using cloud native tools to make sure that you innovate in that way, and apply those AI and machine learning principles that you need against the relevant areas for your business. And so we absolutely do apply our experience of Amazon to make sure that you, the customer, get most out of your investment with AWS and our partners.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks. So what we're going to do now, gentlemen, is we're going to open the floor to the wider audience and see what questions we get back, and I'll pose the questions directly to you. So let's have a quick look what we've got so far. So the first one I can see here is why don't customers move SAP to cloud, and what are the top 3 challenges or myths we should bust? We go to Sean there.
Yeah, certainly something I've seen, but I think that is changing. I'd be quite interested in Jonathan's sort of view from AWS as well. Why don't customers move to cloud? I touched on it earlier. There was kind of a reticence, largely born out of risk averseness to moving SAP to the cloud. But I think that has significantly changed. The other aspect that I saw, which was a real inhibitor to it, really was SAP's own release strategy and what they were doing with S/4HANA. And because if an SAP customer needed to consider, well, they did absolutely need to consider S/4HANA. In my mind, in many respects, that was a new implementation of SAP. And they are huge. They sap the energy and resources, both financially and at a human level, for most organizations embarking on something like that. Then throw in, the whole march to cloud as well. What one would you do first? And I think many people got caught up, and to one degree or another still are. And okay, well, what do we do first? Do we focus our energy and time on S4 because we're being told by SAP that we have to do this? Or do we take a sort of broader view and move to the cloud, where we can see, you know, some of the benefits we've spoken about today, you know, not least cost. So, you know, that has been the dilemma. And I think, you know, what I'm beginning to see, and I think Gary and I are beginning to see, is with SAP extending that S/4HANA deadline, I'll call it that. SAP probably wouldn't like me calling it that, but extending that has at least taken some of that pressure off, and certainly from an IT perspective, it's provided the space for people to think, okay, now, right, let's really explore cloud and what would, you know, bring value in every sense to us. So we can see people maybe going cloud first, landing it in the cloud, and then addressing the whole S/4HANA story. That's my perspective. I don't know, Jonathan, from your perspective, if you're seeing any, you know, any one trend or another regarding that. I think it's still, you know, reasonably early days for that, but
yeah, no, absolutely. I absolutely agree with what you said. But I think SAP was actually one of the last workloads to actually be adopted at scale into you know, the hyperscaler, and the reasons for that sort of a sort of risk-based, and you know, people were concerned about data residency and security and so on. All of those things, I think, now have gone away, and in fact, in the majority of cases, I think most people see actually improved security and resilience through moving to AWS. But also, there's the point about data residency as well, can be a concern. And I think largely those items have been quashed as well. What I would say is, if you do have any concerns, then absolutely work with us and work with AWS and Claranet, and let's get those concerns out on the table and work through those concerns to understand them. But actually, it's very, very unusual now for there to be concerns now, and most people sort of see it as a sort of the new normal, as has been said in the last year or so. Yeah.
And Sean, I can see a kind of question here. I know you mentioned around the extension of the maintenance and support options for SAP Business Suite to 2030. How has that affected? I can see a question here. How has that affected the pace of migrations for customers?
Well, I think conversely, as I probably didn't explain very well earlier, beginning to see that people are, with that extension, people are really biting the bullet and going for a cloud migration. They're kind of seeing that as, okay, we get this sorted, we get, you know, pretty much all of our workloads into the cloud, you know, not just SAP. It gives us that opportunity to do that. And then I think, well, I'm seeing it, but that's very much from a personal perspective. I'd like to see some industry data on this, really. But then people are, once they're in the cloud, getting their heads above the parapet and then viewing SAP S/4HANA. That's the way that I'm seeing it currently, and certainly the customers we're working with, it's more than a trend. That's kind of what's happening, but that's a pretty small subset in terms of who we work with globally. I haven't really got that view yet. I'd be very interested.
Gary, anything further to add on there, expanding on that point?
No, I think just echoing the same things, really, that we saw that for a lot of customers, they saw that it was just too confusing contemplating an S/4HANA migration and the move to public cloud. And there are remember that SAP systems aren't just used in isolation, so that the whole strategy around migration has got to fit into what else they're doing. So, you know, other workloads, you know, maybe, you know, what they're doing with you know, the user provisioning, Active Directory, things like that, all sorts of questions that come into the mix. So I think, yeah, that's definitely helped now, because they've got a clearer strategy. If they're looking at public cloud, they can look to do that first and then decide on what they want to do with their core ERP.
Excellent, thank you. Just look at a few more questions. So are there scenarios where it makes sense for a customer to go direct to SAP and actually consume that as a SaaS type model?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I think there definitely are. Scenario specific. If I'm thinking, there's so many terms now, greenfield, bluefield, all this kind of stuff. But if you're a relatively been through maybe some huge, M&A activity or whatever, it makes sense, or as a certain sense, to look at that and become, conformant to, in effect, SAP's SaaS product business processes. It gives you an opportunity to do that. So I can definitely see that for organisations that have not traditionally used SAP, but if it I guess you'd call it greenfield. There's a certain sense in exploring that. So from my perspective, I think that is that truly is a holy grail, to be completely vanilla and standard and conform to that. But how many organisations can do that? Again, it probably not that many, actually. And if you have been using SAP for greater than 10 years, then you will have your own flavor of SAP that absolutely fits you like a glove. Love it or loathe it, it's your SAP, and the changes you've made to that configuration, etc., it fits you like a glove. And to, in effect, walk away from all of that investment, time and money and knowledge, into something completely new, I think you'd have to have a pretty good reason to do that.
Sean, one thing I would say is obviously there are some SaaS products from SAP like Concur and SAP Analytics Cloud and SAP Data Custodian and SAP Data Warehouse Cloud, etc. Those are all SaaS products, aren't they? So probably worth noting that actually they're already exclusively on AWS. I think when you're looking at SAP S4, for the majority of customers, I think it's quite a compromise SaaS, and so fine for smaller organisations. But I think the majority of customers need a level of flexibility, which means that effectively S4 needs to be, let's call it an on-premise edition from SAP and managed by a partner. And I think that's the majority of cases. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. So I think there's a few more questions here. So how important is an effective change management strategy in getting all of your kind of business users on board, those application owners, and making sure everyone's pulling in the right direction before even taking this journey to cloud?
I've almost got a one-word answer. Really, it's essential. I would say, never underestimate the potential for not having a true change program.
Jonathan, anything further to add there?
No, absolutely echo that. Of course, any, especially SAP, obviously rigorous change management process, absolutely essential. So the same applies, absolutely. One thing I would say is that changes and the way that changes are deployed certain changes can be repeatable in some cases. So there's an opportunity to leverage a lot of the tools and capability of AWS in that sense. So that can improve the quality of changes in certain cases, where you've got to sort of do some repeatable type work. And also, changes are actually, it's one of the areas of differentiation for AWS, because, working with yourselves, we can facilitate those changes in a very sort of quick and agile way. But the same sort of principles apply in terms of rigor and testing and so on, in terms of how you go about those changes. Yeah.
And when we kind of touch back on some of the earlier questions we went through around kind of common pitfalls, is that something you see some partners or customers falling foul to before taking that kind of step?
That question, yeah, absolutely.
I certainly have seen that. Yes. Yeah, it's a bit of a perennial, yeah, regardless of public cloud, private cloud, on-premise, whatever. But the basic principles that, yeah, don't lose sight of, those sort of core best practices, I guess.
Excellent. Well, I think that's kind of all the questions I can see kind of coming through so far. So if there are any additional questions, feel free to send them through. Otherwise, in terms of kind of closing comments, gents, anything further to add there?
Nothing from me.
No, thank you.
No, absolutely. And the only thing I would say is, if there's any questions, queries, don't hesitate to contact myself or Claranet, of course. And very keen to work with you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Jonathan. And just to kind of echo that, so thanks everyone for listening. We hope you've learned something today at least. And if you found this panel talk informative, or you just want to know a little bit more, please feel free to get in touch directly with myself via james.linnane, that's LINNANE @uk.clara.net, and I can obviously facilitate any questions with the gentleman on the panel today. Gents, thanks very much for your time today. I appreciate all your efforts and for answering my barrage of questions. And yeah, thanks again. We'll look to end it there.